As I'm sure most of you probably know, late last week, Donald Trump and his sycophantic Republicans passed their big Despicable bill. And because it was an atrocious 900-page document that was really jammed through Congress so quickly, I think there are a lot of people out there that don't fully understand just how bad this bill actually is. And I want to go ahead and try something a little bit different with you guys today. Instead of looking at a whole bunch of different video clips, I want to take a look at this opinion piece by Steve Rattner over at the New York Times, because I think he does a really good job of laying out with a whole bunch of different charts just how catastrophic this bill is actually going to be. And I know this isn't a format that we've used before on this channel, but if it's something that you find value in, do let me know in the comments and we will try to consider using it more in the future. Now, if you guys do appreciate my work, please do remember to subscribe. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this article. Like I said, this is by Steve Rattner. It's called How Bad Is This Bill? The Answer in 10 Charts. This was an article that was published on July 3rd. So I think that was the same day that this bill was passed by the House and the Senate. It was published before Donald Trump signed it into law. So that it's very possible that these numbers could be slightly off. But this gives us an overall picture of how bad this bill is going to be. And let's go ahead and kick things off. Much like President Trump's 2017 tax bill, it will add substantially to the deficit and the debt without providing any meaningful impetus to economic growth. But this time, it's going to be much worse. And he is not lying here. This was the biggest promise that the Republicans kept on making. They said we were going to see all this growth, we were going to see an economic unlock, and that this bill, it was going to pay for itself, right, guys? It was just going to unlock all of this economic activity, and this bill was just going to light our economy on fire. Everybody was going to be doing good. But if we look at the impact on the deficit over 10 years, we can see that making those 2017 individual tax cuts permanent, that's going to add to our deficit $2.1 trillion over the next 10 years. Increase the standard deduction, that's $1.4 trillion. We increase the child tax credit, that adds $817 billion. Then we've got border and immigration spending, military spending, no taxes on overtime tips, and interest on loans for U.S.-made cars. Those are provisions that actually expire in a few years. Those add $152 billion. And then you've got additional deduction for seniors, which adds $93 billion to our deficit. And then you can look, they actually did do some spending cuts, but they did them in the worst ways possible. They made changes to the student loan repayment programs that took away $278 billion. They phased out the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, which was a whole bunch of renewable energy projects. They took away $543 billion there. And then the Medicaids were the hugest of them all, $841 billion. Now that number could actually be closer to $1 trillion. Like I said, these could be a little bit off, and obviously we're not perfect at predicting what comes next, but those Medicaid cuts could be about $1 trillion when everything is said and done. So they promised that they weren't going to touch the debt or the deficit, or they were actually going to work and improve those numbers, but that is just not the case. This bill is so fiscally irresponsible. It's just absolutely ridiculous that they would even claim otherwise. Let's go ahead and move on to millions lose access to Medicaid. And if we look over here on the left-hand side, how the bill will reduce Medicaid spending, work requirements are going to account for 31% of the cuts that we see in Medicaid. We know that when you add more bureaucracy and more red tape, even if people are qualified for the program, if they don't have an internet connection, they don't have a computer, they don't know how to fill out the paperwork, many people are going to get kicked off their health care, even if they are qualified for the program. We warned against this. Red states have tried this, and we know exactly how it plays out. Even if you are qualified for Medicaid, it's very likely you could get kicked off the program if you are unable to meet their new work requirements. They also make it more difficult for states to fund Medicaid. That's going to account for about 18% of the cuts. Repeal rules simplifying eligibility and renewal. That's going to account for 16%. Check Medicaid eligibility more frequently. That's going to account for 6%. And then you got limit payment to providers, 14%. And then they've got a section called Other. I'm not exactly sure what that accounts for, but that is about 13%. Now, you can look over at the right-hand side here, how the number of uninsured Americans will grow. You can see that we are on a steady decline. We had Obamacare, the ACA, COVID. We put the Medicaid expansion out there, and more people were able to get health insurance. But with this bill, the amount of people who are not going to be able to afford health insurance or not going to be able to qualify for health insurance anymore, it's going to skyrocket the number of uninsured in our country. I mean, we are just completely going backwards. We should be doing the exact opposite of what this bill does. While Republicans claim they are only attacking waste, fraud, and abuse, the resulting paperwork to comply with requirements is expected to daunt many and result in loss of coverage, which is something that we just went over. The cost of college will soar. I don't know if you guys remember, but under the Biden administration, he worked out a new repayment program for people who had college debt. And a lot of that is going away now. I think it was under the Biden administration, all the way up to, what was it? Yeah, between $20,000 and $30,000. If you were on a repayment program and didn't make more than $30,000 a year, then your student loan payment was essentially zero. They're rolling back all of that. So, as it points out here below, the legislation largely guts the Biden administration's student debt repayment program that offered lower and middle income families generous terms. As a result, average monthly obligations for borrowers will surge, with a typical loan recipient with a college degree and an annual income of $80,300 paying an additional nearly $3,000 per year. So this is going to affect people's pocketbooks. There's just no way around this. They're going to have more obligations to pay. I like this graph because what climate change, which is pretty much the mantra of the Republican Party. They have completely denied that climate change even exists. And one of the ways that Biden tried to combat this anti-science rhetoric is by using the Inflation Reduction Act and doing these renewable green projects or green energy projects. He tried to make it so many of those jobs were being created in red districts. The theory was that if we were going to create all these jobs in red districts, it was going to be much less likely that Republicans were going to turn around and try to screw over their voters like that. But as you can tell by this graph, that is exactly what they are doing. So we've already spent $254 billion in Republican districts. There was $388 billion that was pending, which was still meant to be spent in Republican districts. And then if you look in Democratic district, those numbers are substantially lower, $66 billion and $121 billion. But with this bill, a lot of those green energy projects are just going to go away. The bill rolls back many of the clean energy tax incentives and investments created by the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. Most Republican legislators are supporting this, despite the fact that a vast majority of these investments have taken place in Republican congressional districts. Like I'm saying, they are screwing over the very people that put them into office. And not only are they making it... This is the most insane part to me about this whole energy thing with this bill. They are incentivizing new coal projects, which is completely in the opposite direction. But not only are they incentivizing coal, but they're also going to penalize you if you want to do a new renewable energy project. They are adding 10 or 20% taxes to any new project. So they are actively de-incentivizing people for going after those renewable energy projects. It is an absolutely asinine thing to do, and it is putting us at a strategic disadvantage to countries like China, who are just eating our lunch right now as far as green energy goes. Trump's biggest budget buster, the relative scale of Trump's domestic policy bill. You can see that Trump 2025, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, this is, I believe, we're talking about the national debt here. You can see that it's going to add $3.7 trillion to the national debt if this bill were to become permanent. You can see that back in Biden's era, you've got Biden in 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law, that is $0.4 trillion, which means $400 billion. And then Biden 2021 American Rescue Plan Act, that was the response to COVID, that added about $1.8 trillion. But if you go even further back from that, you've got Trump in 2020, who also responded to COVID with the CARES Act, that added about $1.7 trillion to our national debt. And then you've got Trump in 2017 trying to do the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which added $1.5 trillion to our national debt. I think that's one thing that many people don't remember about Biden. Most of the spending or the spending that he was doing or the programs that he was implementing, most of these things were paid for. I mean, minus all of the COVID stuff, Biden and his administration found a way to pay for the programs that they wanted to implement. That is not what we are seeing with the Trump administration. They are going to balloon our debt, and they are ballooning our deficit. The package adds to our national debt in a way that dwarfs any of the other packages passed in 8 years since Mr. Trump's first term, or since Mr. Trump first took office. Spending has drifted out of balance. You can see here federal revenue versus spending. At the top of the graph here, we've got 30% share of GDP. That kind of spiked up in 2020, as we might expect. But as you can see here, it is still on the rise. We've got revenue, which is falling, especially due to this bill. And, we should be pairing our spending with our revenue. We should be collecting taxes based on the programs that we want to implement. That is not being kept in mind here at all with this big, despicable bill. How the budget fits together. You can see the biggest pieces of the budget. You can see that Medicaid and Medicare are still some of our biggest pieces of our budget. We've got non-defense discretionary, Social Security, interest on the national debt, which is just skyrocketing right now, and it is going to skyrocket even further because we are taking on all of this debt and deficit for all of these new programs or all of these tax cuts from this big, despicable bill. We're just being fiscally irresponsible. We are going to work ourselves into a place where we're going to have some debt explosion or some sort of catastrophe because we are just not taking our debt and our deficit seriously, which is something that Republicans have been promising that they would do for decades. But they do the exact opposite when they get into office. And if you take a look at the past number of decades, you can see that it's actually Democrats who are far more fiscally responsible than any Republican has ever been. One big borrowing bill, you can see the impact on the deficit, up over $3 trillion if the bill is made permanent. You can see the impact on the debt to GDP ratio. That's going to be up near 130%. Instead of growing to 2.7 trillion in 2035 from 1.9 trillion this year, this legislation will boost the deficit to 3.08 trillion a decade from now. They are just breaking every single promise that they have made to the American people. That is what is going on here. They've decided that they wanted to get their tax cuts for their billionaire buddies. Those were far more important than people being on Medicaid, than people getting their food assistance. It's just so backwards. It's so backwards. The more you make, the more you benefit. The bill's impact on household finances by income quintile. As you can see here, the bottom 20% of American households are going to experience a loss in buying power. Because when you are taking away Medicaid and you're taking away food assistance and other programs that the poorest people among us rely on, but you're only making that up with a 0.3% increase in their tax receipts or what they're going to get back on their taxes, well, then it doesn't make a difference, right? So the people who are on the lowest end of our earning ladder, they're going to experience the most draconian cuts. You're taking away their food assistance and their Medicaid, and you're not making that up with any extra tax incentives that they are going to benefit from. You can see at 20 to 40%, they've got a 1.5% changes to taxes, while they have changes to SNAP and Medicaid is going to account for a negative 1.5%. And you can see this graph here, all the way at the top of the ladder, the top 20% of earners, they're going to get a 2.7% increase as far as changes in taxes. They're going to see changes to SNAP and Medicaid at a negative 0.4%, and you got a net change of 2.3%. So as you can see, the more you make, the better off you are with this big, despicable bill. The legislation will be far more beneficial for the wealthiest. In contrast, the fifth of Americans with the least wealth will suffer an estimated loss of $560 per year, largely because of the effect of the cuts to Medicaid and food stamps. And I've seen that number go up even higher. So $560 is probably the low end of the spectrum there. The economic benefit is negligible. Like I said before, they kept on promising us that this bill was going to explode our economy. We were going to see so much economic growth that we didn't even need to worry about our debt and our deficits, that all this economic growth was going to make up for that. You can see here that the White House Council of Economic Advisors, they are out in their own league, their own universe. They predict that we're going to have between 2 and 3% growth when nobody else around thinks that that is what's going to happen. It's the same promise that they made when they did the tax cuts in 2017. They said, oh, it's going to stimulate the economy. But it never came true. You can see that most other models have us below 1%. The only person or the only foundation that has us above 1% of growth is the tax foundation, and it's just barely cresting over that 1% growth line. As for the impact of legislation on economic growth, the White House is operating in its own universe. Private forecasters generally expect only a small bump to gross domestic product, with the budget lab at Yale University projecting even less growth. The White House Council of Economic Advisors, on the other hand, asserts that growth could reach 4.9% in 2028, multiples higher than any other estimate. And then he goes ahead and ends the opinion piece with this statement here. He says, in my 50 years of following tax and budget policy, I don't believe I have ever seen another piece of legislation that would have such broad and deep impacts on virtually every American. No important social welfare program like Medicaid has ever been rolled back to this extent. The tax changes will also exacerbate income inequality. It is a result that should embarrass the Republicans and may well come back to haunt them in 2026 and 2028. And I tend to agree. I hope the Republicans pay a huge, huge electoral price for this. This bill is going to be catastrophic. It is going to be so devastating for so many Americans. They keep on claiming that this is all about waste, fraud, and abuse, while they are kicking millions of people, up to 15 million people off of their health care. They're kicking millions of people off of their food assistance. Also, we can have these giant tax breaks for the wealthiest among us. This is going to be the biggest transfer in wealth from the bottom to the top that our country has ever seen. And they want to continue to lie their way through it. This isn't going to help the debt. This is not going to help the deficit. It's not going to unlock all of this economic growth as they continue to claim. This is just going to hurt most Americans who need things most. These people who are on Medicaid, as we have went over before, most of these people are already working full or part-time. And if they're not, they're taking care of a sick mom or dad or a child. There's good reasons why these so-called able-bodied people are on Medicaid, because they are contributing to our society in other ways. And now we are ripping this healthcare away from people. We're ripping these food benefits away from people. And it is going to have massive consequences all across our economy. It's not like these people aren't going to continue getting sick. They're just going to show up in the emergency room. And now the American taxpayer is going to be shelling out 3 or 4 times as much, because now they're in the emergency room instead of having Medicaid and being able to go into the doctor's office and partake in some preventative care. It is just an absolutely terrible idea. So, again, this bill is going to be devastating for the American people. The Republicans lied through their teeth every step of the way. Also, we can give these giant tax breaks to the wealthiest among us. So, like I said before, guys, this is a new format that we are trying out here on the channel. Normally, we keep it to video-based content, but I did think it was important that we go through these different graphs so we can get a really good visualization of just how bad this bill is going to impact folks. So, like I said, if you do like this format, let me know in the comments, and we can explore using it more in the future. But until then, I'll see you guys on the next one. If you guys got anything out of this video, please do remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. We are trying to build something here on the left that adequately pushes back against the right-wing media ecosystem that just launders all of this nonsense for the Republicans and Donald Trump day in and day out. So if you do like what I do here, please remember to smash that subscribe button. Of course, that is free. And if you guys want to see how these Republicans are literally cheering on immigrants being torn apart by alligators, celebrating the cruelty, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.